right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review and the continuation of our RBT Practice Exam series. We're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe for all of our updates. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shoutout. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Jace usually attempts to swipe materials off of the table in order to escape from task demands. Today, Jace started to fall out of his chair in order to escape the demands that were put on him. Swiping and falling could be considered blank. The question is asking about Jace's behavior and specifically the behaviors of swiping and falling. So, what do we know so far about swiping and falling? Well, we know Jace likes to swipe to escape. So, the function of swiping is escaping. And now he's falling to escape. So swiping and falling are both meeting the same function. As we know, different responses with different topographies can meet the same function. Why it's so important that we look at function first and then consider topography. Because just because behaviors don't look the same, they can function the same and have the same effect on the environment. So if we have swiping and falling, which are both used to escape demands, what can we consider these behaviors? A, the same response. Well, they're not the same response, right? Just because they serve the same function doesn't mean they're the same response. They have different topographies, they're different responses altogether. We can consider them, though, in the same response class because both of these responses are serving the same function. Now, they're not stimuli, right? Because the SD is the task's demand. Now it might be the stimulus we're talking about, but the swiping and the falling are the responses and not the stimuli. So they're not the same stimulus and they're not in the same stimulus class because they're both responses, but they're not the same response. They're both in the same response class because they serve the same function. This is a good question to kind of get ingrained in your mind what's a response, what's a stimulus, and then the idea that there can be multiple responses that look different but still function the same. You and your supervising analyst have tried everything, and yet your client is still attempting to run out of the house during bath time. The parent is very worried about the child's safety. Would punishment be appropriate at this point? Now, why would a question ask about punishment and the appropriateness of punishment? Well, ABA is reinforcement first. Right? We want to try reinforcement before punishment, or we want to exhaust all our options before we resort to a punishment procedure. And so when they're asking about if punishment is appropriate, they want to know, is it ethical? Have we tried everything else? Is it necessary to use punishment? Because punishment should only be used as necessary. What do we know so far? We know we've tried everything, and yet the client is still trying to run out of the house, and it's a safety issue. Now, ethically, if it's a safety issue, we want to try to get rid of that behavior as quick as possible. And so you could even argue that punishment's acceptable immediately, depending on how bad the safety issue is. Additionally, you've tried everything. And so if you've tried everything and this is still occurring and it's still a safety issue, well, then we need to go a little further and try to stop this because our priority, other than changing behavior, is to keep the client safe. So, is punishment appropriate at this point? A, no punishment is never appropriate. That's just not true. Punishment is empirically validated. All punishment means is a consequence is decreasing the behavior. So, punishment is sometimes appropriate. B, no, since a safety incident has not yet happened. Well, you don't want to wait for a accident or a tragedy to change the behavior. B is waiting way too long. We shouldn't wait and see. We need to act. C, yes, since other interventions have been tried and it is a safety issue. Exactly. We've tried other interventions. We've tried everything. It's still a safety issue. We haven't resolved it. We need to figure this out. So punishment is appropriate. And then D, yes, punishment is always acceptable for running away. Well, each behavior, each kid is individualized. So we can't speak in broad terms like D. C is going to be our best answer. We've tried everything. It's now a safety issue. It would be ethical to use punishment. If we're going to use punishment, there are things we need to consider, but the question is simply asking, is it okay to use punishment? Yes or no? Joshua uses a green note card to teach his client the color green. After his client is able to label the green note card, Joshua starts to use other green items during teaching trials. What is Joshua encouraging? So we're looking at Joshua's behavior and what is Joshua doing? Well, he's working with a client. He has a green note card and is teaching his client the color green. Once his client is labeling the green note card, he's now introducing other green items during teaching trials. So Joshua has taught his client green to the green note card, and now Joshua wants his client to start labeling other green items during teaching trials. At least we can presume that based on the information given. So if the client is going to start labeling green in the presence of other items, what would that be considered? A, response generalization. With response generalization, we are considering novel responses, different responses. And we're not looking at different responses here because Joshua is using other green items during teaching trials to teach green. So what we have is the same response, just in the presence of new stimuli. And so Joshua is encouraging this idea of stimulus generalization, where we now have the response of green occurring in the presence of multiple stimuli. Joshua is not encouraging overgeneralization. Joshua shouldn't encourage overgeneralization. With overgeneralization, the response is occurring in inappropriate situations or at the wrong time or too much. That's not what is happening here. Joshua is teaching green, and now he's using other items. He's trying to get his client to generalize green across these different stimuli. And then probing. Joshua is not encouraging probing, right? Joshua might be probing, right? Is he probing for other green items? But Joshua isn't encouraging his client to probe. You're the one who would do the probing as the technician, where you would see what their skill level is. So what Joshua is encouraging is this idea of stimulus generalization, where he's trying to get his client to say green in the presence of more than one item. It is usually quicker for you to exit your apartment and make the U-turn at the intersection on the way to school. But each morning, you check your GPS to make sure there isn't a route with a shorter drive time to school instead before leaving your house. What measurement are you likely checking? All right, we have a measurement question, and we need to figure out what measurement are we looking at here? And what do we know so far? Well, we know you are looking for a quick route because it's usually quicker to exit your apartment and make this U-turn. However, every morning, you're still checking the GPS or the route with a shorter drive time. So if you're comparing routes to figure out the shorter or the longer drive time, what measurement are you looking at? A, frequency. Are you counting anything on the route? No, because you're looking at the time. You're looking at the length of time. So what you're looking at is B, duration. You're looking at the length of time that you're driving on these routes. You're looking at the duration of each route. Remember, duration is the length of time of one response. And so in this case, you're driving this route would be what duration are you driving? Latency would be the time from the SD to the first response. You're not measuring time in between an SD and a response. You're simply looking at what is the quickest route. And then rate would need frequency. And since we're not taking frequency, we can't have rate. Remember, rate is frequency over time. So if you're looking at rate, you have to be sure you have a frequency and you have a time component. We don't have a frequency component, we can't use rate. So the measurement we're likely checking is duration. We want to know what's the shortest drive time to school? What duration is it going to be for us to drive on these routes? Because we're going to pick the shorter duration. Latency and inter-response time both measure a point in time between events. What is the major difference between these two measurements? All right, easy question if you're fluent. And this is why fluency is so important. Let's start by defining latency and inter-response time. Latency is what? Latency is time in between the SD and the response. What is inter-response time? Inter-response time is the time in between two responses. So we're looking at the difference between these measurements. What is similar about these measurements? Well, they're both measuring time. They're both measuring time in between. The difference is, what are they measuring in between, right? Because latency, we have an SD to a response. Inter-response time, we have two responses. So A, latency measures time starting from the SD, while IRT measures time starting from the end of the first response. A looks pretty good. That's exactly what we said. Latency is going to measure time starting from the SD to the first response, and then IRT is going to measure time from the end of that first response. So A looks decent. B, IRT measures time starting from the SD, while latency measures time starting from the end of the first response. Now that's reversed, right? IRT doesn't start from the SD. IRT starts from the end of the first response. And so you've got to read very, very carefully here, right? And it's very important on the exam, you are actually reading and taking your time, okay? If you practice enough, if you watch enough videos, if you use our study guides or exams, you will get to the point where you're going fast because accuracy produces speed. C, latency is a more precise measurement than IRT. That's not necessarily true. It's really about what are you measuring, what are you trying to accomplish. And D, IRT is a more precise measurement than latency. Again, not necessarily true. It depends on what you're measuring, how you're measuring. A lot of different factors go into preciseness of the measurement. The difference is latency measures time starting from the SD, while IRT measures time starting from the end of the first response. Thank you for watching. Be sure to check out btexamreview.com. That should be 1V. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube for all of our study materials. When you pass your exam, please let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.